Well, basic training was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I didn't like that at all.
Right.
It was, for basic training, they try to make you into a soldier, and they run you around a lot, you don't get enough sleep, they chew you out all the time, so basic training is kind of nasty. And that's for everybody, that's the way the Army does it. And then after that I went to the medical training, and that was better. Got over to Germany, and the Army part of it still was not great. I mean, there was still, you couldn't go off base during the week, and there were hours, you know, and there were inspections and all that sort of stuff.
Sounds
But
like camp.
yeah, they had what they called an alert, where in the middle of the night, like 2 o'clock in the morning, they'd send out a call, and everybody had to jump into their vehicles, trucks and jeeps, and drive away from the base out in the woods, and then sit out in the woods for the day. And this was the beginning of what they call the Cold War, and we were stationed there basically so the Russians wouldn't invade the rest of Europe.
So was it like a drill or like an actual?
It was like a drill,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And the idea of having U.S. soldiers over there, we're still over there, was that the Russians wouldn't attack with Americans over there, because then the Americans would come into the war. Well, it must have worked because nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
Then there was a place that we called Hohenfels, which was the name of a German town, and they did live firing. And at that point I was driving what they called a litter jeep, which was a jeep that had room for stretchers on it, that you know, take wounded people away from the front lines.
It's kind of an ambulance.
Not as fancy as an ambulance. It was
It's
really a
like
jeep.
Transportation.
Yeah, it was really looked like a jeep. The ambulances had closed sides, you know, sort of like the ones that you see around here. This was a little more basic. And I would go out there and sit on the firing line. Well, there were tanks and artillery, and they would practice shooting. And I now have a hearing problem that started way back then, because we had no earplugs or anything. You know, and I'd sit out there for like 10 hours a day. It wasn't real bad. It was boring, you know, sitting in the Jeep most of the time.
Did you drive the Jeep?
Yeah,
It's like an ambulance driver.
yeah, that's sort of like an ambulance driver. But usually, I don't remember more than 2 or 3 times I ever had to take anybody to the hospital.
So you took people to the hospital from that firing range area, or just?
Yeah, those are the only times from the firing range that I ever had to take anybody to the hospital. At the base, we never had any kind of things happening that people would get injured.
Yeah, so nothing super exciting.
Yeah, nothing super exciting. But then they would give us time off, weekends, or you could get a 3-day pass or a 2-day pass, and we could go out in town. And I was in a town the town was Ulm,
Please spell that. Actually, I was trying to talk for later.
ULM. And we were across the river in what was called, they called it Neu-Ulm, which is spelled N-E-U, or New Ulm. And this is now a sister city to New Ulm, Minnesota.
Oh.
A number of years ago I went to New Ulm, because when we lived in Winthrop we were 15 miles away, And in the city hall are pictures of the town in Germany
Oh,
that I stayed in. It's kind of cool.
so you kind of recognize some of the places?
Yeah, I could see some of the places. The center of town had a church with a really tall spire. You could see from miles away, and they had cement steps that went up to the top, and you could walk up that. And I walked up that about 5 different times. The last time with Grandma.
Oh,
We
so
were
you-
over there on a trip.
Oh, when was that?
So I took her up there. I think that was 1982.
Was it families or just grandma?
It was, we went there twice, but that time it was with Aunt Lois and Uncle Steve.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, because they had kids are most of them are in college.
Yeah. So that was a trip to go over and see if we could find some relatives.
Mm.
You know, my sister's a genealogist, and went to Switzerland and found some relatives in this town of Glarus. And then that was my mother's side of the family. My father's side of the family came from a town called Weilerswist. And I don't know if the name was connected, no. Whether
Yeah.
it was Schwist and,
Yeah, so kind of similar.
yeah. But it was a little bitty town. Found a house that my great-grandfather had lived in before he came to the United States. Never got to look at the inside, but couldn't have looked at it from the
Yeah,
outside.
that's kind of cool.
So I was able to travel around Europe when I was in the service quite a bit. And
Just
that
like
was,
with the service? Or just like,
it was on our own. Usually it would be 2 or 3 of us GIs that would go and take a train or take a bus and go somewhere. And we did travel in the service, but you couldn't stop and see anything. You know,
yeah, you're going somewhere.
you're in a convoy and you're going somewhere. The people, this was 1954, 1955, so it was maybe about, say, 10 years after the end of the Second World War, and
So Germany is still kind of a mess.
yeah, there was damage. The people were fairly friendly, which was nice. I mean,
Where exactly were you in Germany? Like west, east?
it was West Germany.
Yeah, so it's like eastern mostly. Russia.
Yeah,
So,
it was Russian controlled
yeah.
at that point. And I was halfway between 2 towns, the big towns of Munich and Stuttgart. And the countryside was beautiful. It was a lot like Wisconsin and Minnesota.
So it kind of looked like home.
Kind of looked like home. The people were not dressed like Americans. And they were, you know, hard-working country people, most of them, because where we were. There were people that lived, the farmers. They had the animals in the same room, the same building as the house.
Oh, really? Like connected to it? Or
Yeah,
like
so
the
they
same
could-
building.
They could open the door inside and walk in where the cows were, which was interesting.
So did you go to some of the houses?
Just one. Stopped once, and these people let us come and look in the house.
Just to see what it was like?
Yeah. So let's see. Went to Switzerland. Took a tour and went to Paris and climbed the Eiffel Tower,
I'll do that next
which
time.
everybody does. Actually, we went to Italy first on a train. There were 3 of us, 3 GIs, and then we flew to Paris on a Navy plane, free. We just went in and
Nice.
sat in with all the. It was cargo. There was no.
Oh, saw supplies.
There were no seats, you know. and then flew again from Paris back to Germany on a Air Force plane. So the transportation was pretty cheap.
Free.
Yeah, not real comfortable, but it was free.
Probably pretty hard to get that.
Yeah. So what else?
Kind of on that subject, like there was like a lot of wars during them. Like my history textbook, it says like there was war hot versus war duck, but were you really like either side or just kind of, you know? Like,
In the Second World War?
no, like about the Vietnam War and yeah, more about Vietnam more than anything else, I guess. That was they talked about
Yeah.
huge controversy over it.
Of course, that was, I got back out of the service in '56, and, we got married in 1961, and the Vietnam War started like '61, '62. Grandma and I were doves. We were basically wondering what we were doing in Vietnam. And it was a difficult time. There weren't a lot of what you would call hawks in the United States at that point, and the government had gotten us in there and weren't quite sure how to get us out. Mom's brother Bill, young brother Bill, was over there. He flew a helicopter, and he was wounded while he was flying, and he came back out, and he said he felt pretty strongly that people where he went back in Green Bay in that area kind of looked down on him because he'd been in the war. And I've read that the Vietnam veterans are still upset over the fact that they went over there and risked their lives and nobody appreciated it.
Yeah, kind of the first war like that.
Yeah.
Did any other family serve or just Grandma's brother? And just any wars, really?
Well, let's see, my dad was in the train station, ready to go into the Army when the First World War ended. And I was too young for the Second World War. And I stayed in college
Yeah.
during the Korean conflict.
So kind of avoided that.
I had cousins and cousin-in-laws that were older than I were. They were in the Second World War. Of course, your dad and Scott and Mark were all,
Yeah, registered.
they're all registered, didn't have to go in. So there's not a lot of war history in the family.
Okay. It's kind of surprising.
Yeah, it's a matter of luck, If you're the right age,
Great timing.
yeah, if you're the right age, you go in.
Yeah,
You
like
know.
if you hadn't gone to college, you probably would have gotten drafted earlier.
Yeah, well, I went to college. I stayed in college, so I wouldn't have to go to Korea, which maybe isn't the most patriotic thing in the world. There were a number of friends that went in the Air Force during the Korean War because that was safer. Because again, it was not a real popular. Second World War was a popular war. We were attacked, and we were. It was going to be the war to end all wars.
So I say.
And the Korean conflict was not very popular, and Vietnam was not at all.
Yeah, no one really remembers the Korean War. That's what history teachers say. But
Yeah, it was a relatively short period of time, and over in Asia, not in Europe. So.
yeah. Let's see. Were you and Grandma Catholic?
Oh, another story.
Okay.
Uh, Grandma was and is a Catholic, and I'm Lutheran.
Oh, okay.
And that when we first met, we were friends because we knew that we could never get married because of the religious difference. And back in this was back, in 1960. People really didn't want their children to marry outside of the faith, and there were a number of people that I knew that the parents would stop talking to their kids if they married outside of the faith.
Did it happen with you?
No. My mother was a little bit upset. We laugh about that now. She asked me why I couldn't find a nice Lutheran girl. My dad was fine with it. My grandma's dad had died earlier. He died in like 1955. I'd never met him. Her mother, Grandma, she told Mary whatever she wanted to do was fine. So it's really not been a problem. It's made it somewhat difficult for our kids to look at going to church a lot. Your dad,
Yeah.
close to Mary, and part of that is because they could see, they could see when Mom went to church, Dad stayed home.
Kind of how it is for me now.
So you're
Even though Mom's technically Methodist.
yes, and I think most of the people at church don't know it, that she's Methodist.
Yeah, because she's technically not a member of the church, but she's more, like,
She's more part of the church.
community-wise, she's more part of the church than my dad is. A
Yeah.
lot more.
That's right.
Because really, she isn't supposed to take the wine and
Yeah,
Eucharist.
the communion.
And like she said before, like Finn is more Catholic than I am.
That's right.
But anyway, going off of that, this might not have had a big effect, but like, 'cause JFK was the first Catholic president, might not have as big effect on you since technically you were Catholic, but.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think that I voted for him. My dad was Republican, and I was Republican for a lot of years. Grandma, her first chance to vote was for JFK, and she voted for him. And her family, pretty much to this day, are all Democrats. The family out east and back in Wisconsin are pretty much, they're Irish Catholic and Democrats. I guess I mellowed over the years, and I call myself an independent, and I vote across the party lines. I'll vote for Democrats and Republicans, although lately I've been basically voting for Democrats. But your grandma has basically been a Democrat all her life, as was her mother and the other relatives. So when JFK was killed, we lived in Kiel, and it was a Sunday. No, excuse me, it must have been a Saturday. Or it could have been a Friday. No, I don't know the date. We were, I had the weekend off, so I'm guessing it was a Saturday morning. And we were going to drive down to Milwaukee where my parents were. And I went into the plant to check on something before we left, and somebody said something in the plant that they heard they'd been shot. And so we went back home and turned on the radio and listened, and he'd been taken to the hospital. So we got in the car and drove the roughly 2 hours to Milwaukee. What day of the week was JFK killed?
Friday.
Was it a Friday? So we were leaving Kiel then on a Friday morning. Okay. And we got down to Milwaukee to my parents' house, and then thought by that time he had died.
And we didn't have a radio in the car.
Didn't have a radio in the car, so we couldn't listen.
Keep up.
And the reason the car was a 1959 Triumph, which is 1 year newer than the one that's in the barn. So that was our car, and we had Kathy and Steve, you know, so, but no radio.
Right.
So we went down, spent that, I remember that weekend in Milwaukee was just endless, because everybody just pretty much watched television. You know, there was no partying, there was no going to visit anybody. We just sat there and watched the whole weekend, and then Sunday night went back up to Kiel again. I'm assuming at that point everybody had black and white television sets, so it
Graphic.
wasn't maybe as graphic as it would be now.
Yeah. Well, I think there are colored videos out there, but
Yes,
I think because I remember seeing, well, like not the actual shooting, but I remember seeing video.
yeah.
But
No, maybe we had color TVs there. That could be. They we didn't have a color TV when I went in the service. That was 1954. So it could have been that you know, like my grandma and grandpa had it. But I remember sitting there and watching.
I guess I'll get go ahead. I guess I'll camera.
Bats. They are most famous for being rude to